But the whole point, of course, about my, what you describe it, a psychodrama regarding Brexit was about lies. And it was about the fact that if liars win, then they won't stop lying. They'll go on and tell a whole bunch of new lies. And whether or not there is some sinister agenda, some sinister Bannonite agenda behind Boris Johnson, just as there was behind Donald Trump, I do not know. I care, but I can't claim to know. But if there is, then the lies that prompted Brexit will next be applied to the two massive institutions, and I mean massive financially and socially, that stick in the craw of hard right so-called libertarians, by which they simply mean if you lose your job, you should probably lose your life. The NHS and the BBC. And I said to you in June of 2016 that part of the reason why I'm afraid I'm not going to, quote, get over it is because if they pull this one off, then the next things in their sights will be the NHS and the BBC, because they both have two enormous things in common, the NHS and the BBC. The first is that they don't pay any dividends to shareholders. So if you already have a ton of money and you're looking for ways to increase that ton of money without having to do anything except have a ton of money in the first place, then, and that's, I portray that as a negative. It's also the principle upon which most of us will be relying if we're lucky enough to have a pension, a private pension. So, it's like everything else in life. It's not 100% good or 100% bad. But your vulture capitalist, your person who will tear the heart out of a chain of care homes in order to make a few quid in a 12-month window, that kind of, they look at the BBC and they look at the NHS. And I also think, oddly, don't laugh, I think they also look at allotments. No, don't laugh, all right? I think if you lived where I lived, some of the allotments near me must be among the most prime real estate in the southeast. So I live quite near the River Thames, and our allotment is much, much nearer to the River Thames than our house is. So I also think they look at allotments and see money instead of things that you can't put a price on, like fresh air and communing with nature and growing your own food. And actually, they call it self-care now, mental health, all of these things. I know, I said you might laugh. But we won't talk about allotments today. Oh, Lord, we're back to Jeremy Corbyn. The BBC and the NHS stick in the craw of a certain type of sociopath because there's no money there. And the certain type of sociopath I'm describing is the poor, tragic figure who thinks if they could just get a bit more money, then actually they'll be happy. Or they might just develop empathy and stop feeling so weird about it. They never will. I think deep down they know that. They will never have enough. And they hate the idea of the BBC and the NHS because they don't deliver dividends to anyone. The other thing they have in common, the licence fee notwithstanding, this is, once you've paid the licence fee, the service you get from the NHS and the BBC does not improve or decrease according to how wealthy you are. And they hate that as well, you see. Two things. Number one, no dividends for investors, no rewards for being already rich. And number two, you can't pay more to get a better service. Within the NHS, I know you can pay more to go privately, but you can't get different bands of NHS membership. Gold standard, where we'll see you in 24 hours. Silver standard, where we'll see you in a week. Bog standard, where we'll see you 6 months on Tuesday. Do you see what I mean? They hate that as well, because these people believe, for good or for ill, doff cap, tug forlong, that if you've got money, you're better than people who haven't. And the great mystery of post-war politics, of course, is that an awful lot of people who haven't got money also believe that they're inferior to people who have got money, which is why they go along and vote for things that will actually harm them. Brexit. So that's my theory on why the BBC often appears in the same category as the NHS. Or perhaps more clearly, it's why people who think that they wanted Brexit will now be persuaded that they don't want the BBC. For really just the same reasons, like sheep being herded into a pen to the benefit of very, very rich people, potentially. People who don't think that if you lose your job, the state should look after you until you can find another one. And the price you pay for that is that ne'er-do-well over the way, who isn't even looking for a new job, he gets looked after as well. Because it's not ideal, but it's the only way you can guarantee that you'll be looked after. You see, if you get sick, you go to hospital. They hate it because they can afford to pay for themselves, and you could form a group. You could call it something like the Taxpayers Union, and you could pretend that you were on the side of all taxpayers, whereas in fact all you were doing was representing the interests of the people who pay you, and you wouldn't have to disclose who paid you. You could even perhaps describe yourself as an educational charity if you wanted to. James O'Brien's Taxpayers Union, which campaigns tirelessly on behalf of people who can afford to pay for their own healthcare and their own private education, thank you very much. So why the hell should my taxes as a very rich person be spent on looking after poor people who need an NHS or who need, access to schools? Why should I be paying for your kids' schools, you plebs? That's what James O'Brien's Taxpayers Union does. And I'm not going to tell you who funds it. Of course I'm not. That would give the whole game away. I'm going to pretend that that's a stupid and rude question. So the BBC and the NHS often appear in the same targets of outfits like James O'Brien's Taxpayers Union. And I think that's why. I think it's that simple.